Facebook Live and Twitter live streams. And please do, as you view the interview, please contribute any questions you might have. We'll try to get to them. We'll also be providing a number of polls, and we'll try to share the results in real time. Okay, so let's get the show on the road. And thank you so much for prompting me with your questions. They are mostly better than mine. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and we are discussing today integrated multi-sectoral approaches to addressing the critical agricultural and food security challenges that affect the Global South with our special guests, Kate Schechter, PhD, President and CEO of World Neighbors, Bridget Carrington, Interim CEO of the Coffee Quality Institute, and Maria Kasparian, Executive Director of Edessa Nutrition. Maria, I might have messed up the name. Edessa Nutrition.
Yeah, you got it.
So a reminder, Zoom attendees that would take 3 snap poses during the show. We'll announce results, and your questions submitted to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining us. I am so excited about talking about food, one of my favorite topics. I eat food every day if I'm lucky, although perhaps I need to diet just a little bit. We're going to just sort of set this up, and we're going to go to UK. Countries in the Global South will not achieve prosperity until these regions are able to sustainably feed their people and not depend on imports of food. It's a really important point. And so to shift realities, you really do have to start with fundamentals like food, access to water, health, sanitation, and so on. So we're going to go around the table and just give a quick summary of what each of you do and how each of you views these problems. So starting with Kate at World Neighbors, could you share your perspective on this incredibly complicated set of challenges as we seek sustainability in the Global South when it comes to food production? Kate?
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for having me on the show. World Neighbors is a relatively old organization. We've been around for almost 72 years this April, and we work primarily, or actually exclusively, with very remote communities, rural agricultural communities in 14 countries around the world. Of course, this is the main focus of our work, is food security. In order to really help these communities, we have a methodology that is primarily focused on training, but also on self-sufficiency. So we have a community-based methodology, which is teaching people basically to help themselves. And one of the main things that we do is teach the farmers to have food, to grow their own food. So in addition to maybe growing cash crops or having fish ponds or other sorts of revenue sources, every single community that we go into, we teach people to have their own kitchen gardens. Don't buy your vegetables, grow your vegetables. We promote growing local resilient crops, looking at crops that may have sort of disappeared, but we're now trying to bring them back. That goes for seeds as well, sharing seeds that might be more resilient to climate change. We promote conservation agriculture, which means minimum soil tillage, permanent soil coverage, crop diversification, rotation of crops, intercropping, and all of these things help during very difficult periods of drought. They increase productivity of the soil. Again, another very essential component is water management, cisterns, rainwater conservation, usage of gray water, using solar pumps to irrigate large fields. We promote biosand water filters in all the households that we work with. And now we're really pushing this idea of water-sourced, water-based farming. So getting farmers to try to work near their water sources instead of bringing the water to the fields.
The thing that really strikes me is that in this country, we have a very sophisticated Department of Agriculture that does this exact same thing for American farmers. So you are basically, and you're also repairing some of the destructive practices that occurred over 60 or 70 years of Green Revolution, well-intentioned policies that basically encourage people to buy seeds from a central source, to go to monocultures, to focus on sort of this industrial distribution, not to grow their own vegetables and so on. Bridget, when you look at the Coffee Institute, you're taking a cut of what Kate is talking about, but you're focusing on specifically on coffee. Talk about how you see this problem set from your perspective at the Coffee Quality Institute. You'll want to unmute your microphone.
Sorry, fell at the first hurdle there. Thanks, and thanks for having me also. Yeah, actually what Kate's just said resonates a lot with a lot of the work that we see as part of our projects. And CQI, Coffee Quality Institute, is 25 years old and has been providing education. It's an educational trust, and we provide education in coffee quality, both sensory, so how you taste coffee and how you understand its value through taste, and also through post-harvest processing, so how that affects the quality of the coffee and ultimately the value of the coffee. So basically our aim is through education to provide, empower farmers and create sustainable livelihoods and sustainable coffee communities, sustainable agriculture. And what we try to do is, or what we've tried to do through our program, our educational program, is create a common language that runs through the whole value chain. And so the buyers and the sellers can talk the same language, and the farmers can understand more about the value of their product. They can then have better access to market and better market linkage, and hopefully they can, sell it for a higher price, because farmers, I mean, more than half of smallholder farmers live below the poverty line. They don't produce enough coffee to create themselves a livelihood. So they basically, it's a vicious circle. They can't, if they don't have food, they can't afford food, they can't afford to feed their trees, so they get less crop. And so they live in this, below this poverty line. And also coffee is a long-term crop. It's not it's a cash crop, but it's not, or in many countries it's a cash crop. Where I am in Kenya at the moment, it's not even a cash crop. So they may have to wait a year, more than a year, to get the revenue from the coffee that has been on the trees and has been sold.
Well, that's right. It's a process to go from bean to actually a product.
Absolutely. So I mean, the harvest is like the crop cycle is about 9 months, 9-10 months. Right. So they have to wait a long time. So when we're doing projects, and we work on a lot of donor projects, providing the educational part of that and the training part of that. But that's also, to teach them how to diversify, to teach them how to intercrop, to create, I don't know, dairy farming, to grow mangoes, to grow avocados, to create different revenue streams, so that, that they can afford to send the children to school all through the year, and they can afford the medicines they need, or the home improvements they really need to try and improve their livelihoods. But basically in coffee, the problem is that obviously it's linked to the international futures market. So sometimes the price is way below the cost of production. And that ultimately is the problem in coffee, that we need to pay farmers more than the cost of production in order for them to have sustainable livelihoods from coffee.
The thing that really strikes me is this transfer of knowledge and the transfer of power, and the whole idea of creating rationality that actually benefits the entire system. Maria, could you unmute your mic, because it's time for us to hear about Adisia. And Adisia has just a very, very fascinating business model. Talk a little bit about how Adisia Nutrition sees this problem set and the programs that you promote.
Sure. So we're talking a lot about food, and food is inextricably linked from nutrition, right? So it's not just about full bellies, it's also about the right nutrition. Macronutrients, micronutrients. So enough fat, enough protein, enough vitamins and minerals to grow healthy bodies and brains. And Adisia's mission is to help treat and prevent malnutrition all over the world, and especially in vulnerable populations. So vulnerable populations, conception to 2 years of age. We talk a lot about the first 1,000 days of life. So very young children and pregnant and lactating moms being some of the most important groups to reach, to make sure that the right building blocks are there for healthy bodies and brains and ultimately healthier lives. So we manufacture, we're a little further along the supply chain. We manufacture ready to use therapeutic foods. This is called Plumpy Nut, and that is to treat kids that are already severely malnourished. We are unfortunately doing a lot of that right now. We work with partners like UNICEF, the World Food Program, USAID, NGOs like Doctors Without Borders, Save the Children, because of COVID, climate change, and all sorts of crisis and conflict. We're seeing very high rates, and food prices. I think we heard that mentioned as well. Food prices are up. That means people don't have enough access to diverse diets. That means we're seeing more malnutrition. So we are manufacturing these foods in the United States and distributing them through the partners I mentioned. In addition to that, we're part of a network called the Plumpy Field Network. So we have partner factories in Ethiopia, Niger, Sudan, Nigeria, India, Haiti. There are 9 total in developing countries where they're also manufacturing these products, not only the Plumpy Nut, but also products that are more geared toward prevention and supplementing to make sure the macro and micronutrients are there. So those factories in the field also work along the supply chains in their regions to help make sure that they can source more of the ingredients they need to make the product. So that means sourcing peanuts, means working with peanut farmers, sourcing soy, working with soy farmers, oils, milk products, sugar, vitamins and minerals along the supply chain. So it's kind of both meeting the immediate emergency and then building more sustainable systems and supply chains so that the needs can be met locally.
It strikes me that the commonality between all of the 3 organizations that are represented here and so much of the thinking that is going on right now is this idea of global and local simultaneously, and that the solution seems to reside more and more and more, or the consciousness that the solution resides more and more and more in the global South itself, with the farmers. Kate, you're nodding along. Talk a little bit about that, because you've been in this field for a long time, right? You've seen the changes. When you first came, that really wasn't the idea, right? I mean, 20, 30 years ago, it was sort of those poor people kind of thing. And I think that the ideas have changed to a more listening, more attentive, instead of thinking about those poor people, instead thinking maybe that those people actually always had the solution and we kind of screwed it up. And maybe we should be talking to each other. Kate, how do you see the changes?
Well, it's interesting that your first reaction when I was talking about all the ways in which we're trying to create food security and improve sustainable agriculture was to go to the American model and say, well, we have all this, and and our agriculture department helps our farmers. And I think that what came to mind immediately is how important it is to respect local expertise. So one of the things that we do is we don't use external consultants, or even many times we try to get people who are from that particular region to be the experts and to be the trainers. So for example, in the Andes in Peru, you want somebody who's dealt with the challenges of working in these very remote, high Andes mountains, who can really give good advice and that the farmers are going to trust. I mean, a good example of where we've really had to sort of take a big leap is in Indonesia, we have developed a rainfall prediction app in which farmers are working with local universities to try to predict the rainfalls and be able to then plant and not lose their crops and to adjust to climate change. Well, initially, when we reached out to the farmers, even though we were, our staff are all local people, the farmers were like, yeah, right. I've been doing this and my family's been doing this for hundreds of years. Don't tell me when I should plant, So it took some work to have the farmers trust the universities respect the farmers. And now after we've been doing this for 9 years and honing it over all that time, we're getting to a point where we have a very, very effective system in which the universities can actually map out for the farmers what they predict will be the rainfall patterns.
So these are local universities basically collaborating with local farmers with an exchange in which the university professors view the farmers as the experts in their field and are learning from the local farmers. So that's a matter of respect. It's listening, it's benefiting from that exchange. Bridget, I'm sure this is playing out, right? In coffee production, in these various environments. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I listen with that with interest, because I just remember one time, well, it's quite a few years ago, when I wasn't actually working for Coffee Quality Institute, but we had a project. It was supporting women. It was called Women in Coffee. It was part of a bigger international movement of women in coffee, and we had this component in the project to teach women a little bit more about how to manage their household budgets, and that a sort of finance sort of back little bit of teaching. And we set this off, and it built up this whole huge thing of non-trust, because we didn't invite the men to it. So in the end, we had to invite couples to come to do it. But the minute we invited the men, it sort of took off. But in terms of CQI and what we do, we work with instructors to provide our education under license. And we're also trying to get many more geographically positioned instructors in the countries where we're doing the work, rather than sort of helicopter in an American instructor, of which we have very good instructors and many. So we're kind of also pivoting a little bit in that way, but it takes quite a long time to train these instructors. So we also look at, for instance, I can just quote an example at the moment. We're sending instructors from Brazil to Thailand. We're sending instructors from Central South America to the Philippines. We've just had instructors in India doing a post-harvest practicing course. So we're trying to kind of cross-pollinate origin-wise in that respect as well. But it's interesting again that recently, USAID is talking about localization, and it's something that we also have to address, because in the past we were part of huge multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects providing education over a period of 4 or 5 years. And now that's kind of changing, because now it's the local people that are dictating how, and for the better, these projects are built up. So we're having to adapt our program to be able, because they still need the education, but there are still the local instructors that can provide the same education, because that's how we're set up anyway.
Well, I'll bet that Maria has the same kind of story, right? Are you doing a lot of cross-pollination? So, for example, if you have manufacturing facilities in different countries, you're not flying people from the US, you're moving from one country in the global south to another so where people are sharing. And then you also, those people on the ground are dealing with their cultural differences, right?
No, absolutely. So the Plumpy Field Network was actually started by a French company, Nutriset. And so there's the French company, and then there's Edicia in the US. Apart from that, all the other partners, the 9 others, are in local countries, and there is a lot of regional cross-pollination. So initially, the initial technology transfer starts in France, and that does help. But then after that is launched, so we have a West Africa region. So there's cross-pollination. The factory in Burkina Faso, when they were getting set up, they went to Niger, they got advice there, they had techs go back and forth. In Sudan and Ethiopia, those 2 factories, there's also a lot of back and forth support. They had a factory director who was from Sudan, went and ran the factory in Ethiopia for a couple of years to get them up and running. And it is a lot easier to help with regional challenges. Now that's also happening with some of the extension work. So Sudan has been a leader with working with peanut farmers. It's called Dar Foods, and they work in they work with thousands of peanut farmers in Darfur, and it's mutually beneficial, right? It helps the farmers, they're getting supply chains, and then they have a guaranteed market because they want those high quality, low aflatoxin peanuts to be able to make plumpy nut in the factory in Khartoum. So that extension work experience is also something they're able to share with other partners who are trying to do more extension work. And certainly they've got a lot more experience than in a lot of those areas than we do in the US.
I wonder whether this approach of using nonprofits, local government actors, local community actors, international NGOs, and so on, all coming together, that this approach actually is better scaled to meet the local and regional needs and more adaptable than some government bureaucracy that is deployed on a nationwide basis, because nations' borders are very often arbitrarily set, right? Whereas regions, agricultural regions, cross borders. So if instead of looking at this as a national sort of problem that is determined by national bureaucracies, instead, if you have this conglomeration, you can flexibly adapt to the agricultural situations that you're finding in these different countries. Are there any thoughts that you have on how the future ought to evolve in this space so that you are more and more effective and you're not stepping on each other's toes as you're trying to serve your various constituents? Kate, venture any thoughts?
I would say that World Neighbors, first of all, is a relatively small organization. So our goal is actually to get the government to come in and to take over a lot of the areas that we are sort of jump starting.
So you're a pump primer, you're jump starting,
right.
And then is that transferring to government only, or is it for local nonprofits or
it's everything? It's finding partners. We work with local partners, local NGOs or community-based organizations. If they're not there, we'll help form them, because our whole sustainability model is that we're going to get out of there and we're going to want them to be then monitoring and sustaining all of these interventions that we've started. So we actually work very closely with governments. We want the government to come and see the work and then to figure out how they can support it in the long term. We're dealing with communities that many times are very far from the grid. I mean, in Haiti, for example, you have the challenge that I can sit here and say, oh, we work with governments. Well, there isn't much of a government in Haiti right now.
It's a conflict zone. Haiti is one massive conflict zone.
Exactly. So there you have this challenge that you don't want to completely give up on having the government move towards these very remote areas. On the other hand, you have to make sure that they have their own ability to sustain, given the crisis that they're in right now.
We asked a couple of questions. We said, what is the most critical food security challenge facing the global South today? And we posed climate change, poor farming techniques, poor access to markets. The vast majority of people said all are critical. And then we also asked about food supplies and prices are especially vulnerable to climate change in sub-Saharan Africa and other places in the global South because, and again, you have kind of an all of the above kind of an answer: lack of resilience, food import dependence, excessive government intervention, and so on and so forth. So if we take a look at these kinds of issues and we see that there are so many complex elements here, how do we, Maria, create a response that is adaptable as needs shift from region to region, as the climate changes so quickly, as water comes and goes? How do we create responses that increase resilience across a broad front? It's not just sitting there and educating people, right? There is this combination of immediate help, as some of your products provide, and then sustained help by transforming the production from a centralized sort of Western-based production to a regional-based production that also, in the way it unfolds, that also increases resilience against all of these different effects. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think in this world, it's never either or, it's always both. Like you were asking previously about government versus not NGOs, it's both. Kate, you were talking about that. When we're talking about how do we have resilience, I really love the model of social enterprise, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. I think that we're all touching upon that, of using business to do good. So developing these supply chains to do good, because they ultimately can be more sustainable if people have access first, to the inputs they need, and then are empowered to create what small businesses, medium-sized businesses, social enterprise. You are creating value in the community, and also people are benefiting from it directly. They're creating things that are needed in their country, and they also are benefiting from it. It's
That's interesting,
supply chains, and it has a ripple effect.
There's this big discussion in business as to whether one should think about social impact of business as part of business, right? There's this real debate, but you're talking, Kate, about this not really being a debate. Business should be not only self-sustaining and thriving, and they should, profit making and so on and so forth, but also safeguard the customer, the consumer, the partners, and advance their interests. Bridget, how do you see this evolution of business? Are we talking about a model that is firmly on the side of sort of social impact, beneficial social impact of business, in the way that, for example, the Hershey model in U.S. history was an attempt to advance that kind of benefit across a broader community? Bridget, you're on mute again.
No, I think that in the coffee industry that there is a lot of pre-competitive work that's now going on with the roasters, that they are part of the solution, that they're becoming part of the solution, and social impact. Yes, it's partly that, but it's really to secure the supply of coffee and good quality coffee, and
it's
more
in their
of it.
interest.
It's in their interest. So, I mean, there are a lot of global coffee organizations and movements that are addressing these problems together, like the World Coffee Producers Forum. There's also the ICO, the International Coffee Organization, that has a private sector panel. There's a global coffee platform. So there are a lot of places that we can go and meet and talk together. And that's where the whole value chain comes into play, because it is in everybody's interest. So it's in working together, we have to sort of find the solutions. And climate change resilience and crop resilience, coffee resilience, the research is ongoing to try and find more resilient plants so that we can continue to drink coffee for the next 50 years. Because at the moment, with two degrees change in climate, a lot of the producing countries will not exist anymore.
It's very interesting. What you're all saying is that we actually are looking at not a zero-sum game. We are instead looking at an optimization challenge. How do we optimize the benefit across a broad swath, instead of being transactional, where you lose if I win, and if you win, I lose? Instead of doing that, we're talking about basically helping each other and respecting each other and listening to each other and learning from each other, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Is that the power that you all have in terms of how you operate when you go and talk with donors and supporters? Is that a major part of your pitch, Kate, when you're out there talking to people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm big on telling people you're part of the global community. Our name says it all. We're all world neighbors. I encourage young people when I speak at universities to become global citizens, engage in what's going on out there. It becomes very fulfilling. I talk about, we're not a faith-based organization, but there is a kind of a spiritual feeling when you go out and you see that people are doing better because of the work that we're doing with them. It's a great feeling. So yeah, I would definitely say that your term optimization is great. It encapsulates what we've all been talking about in the last half hour.
Well, it's just great to discuss this with you. I'll leave you with this thought. We asked a question: who do you believe is responsible to fix the agriculture and food security challenges in the global South? And we got 3 answers. The three answers all had even numbers of responses: governments, and then people in the global south, and people in the G20. So if you look at governments, they're going to be people in the G20 and people in the global south. So it really comes down to that partnership. I'd like to thank you, Kate Schechter, President and CEO of World Neighbors, Bridget Carrington, Interim CEO of the Coffee Quality Institute, and Maria Kasparian, Executive Director of Edicia Nutrition. You are just so wonderful. Please thank your staffs, your board members, your donors, your communities, your partners, and please thank the people on the ground from us. It is just wonderful to have people who are working toward a common solution in a way that advances respect, advances resilience, and helps us all actually have access to these wonderful, wonderful products that you're producing and distributing.